Okay, so hopefully you have already watched the lectures on point and line. As I've said, in our first unit, we are going over the basic elements of design, which are point, line, shape, value, texture, and color, though color gets its own unit because it's a little more complicated. So, welcome to the third lecture, shape. Okay, again, as in pretty much all the lectures this semester, you'll have pages like this which have a bunch of terms related to whatever our topic is. So today's shape. I don't read them to you because you are smart college students and you can read. So you can go back over the slides, which I always attach separately from the lecture so that you can go review those on your own times, because these bolded terms with definitions are the things that end up showing up on your vocabulary quizzes. So keep that in mind. For our purposes, a shape is a flat, enclosed area. Okay, from point to line and now onto shape and even volume, we have our most basic kind of building blocks for everything that we create in terms of visual art and design work. Okay, so here's an example. This is Aaron Douglas. So both flat and gradated shapes can be used to create an arresting image. So we don't have to have super complicated things. When you look at any kind of composition, it breaks down into these basic elements that we're talking about. That's why they're the basic elements, right? Okay. So in this work by Aaron Douglas, who's an artist from the Harlem Renaissance, so if you have art history too, hopefully you have someone who talks about the Harlem Renaissance. They don't always. If you have art history too with me, I do talk about it. Or if you have a history of modern art class, you would probably talk about it. So Aaron Douglas is a famous artist from the Harlem Renaissance, and he did quite large-scale works like this one. So here we see flat silhouettes combined with transparent kind of target-like shapes that create this energetic panorama. And it's these shapes, the silhouetted forms without all the detail inside, and then the transparent target-like shapes that create this kind of energy and dynamism in this composition. So this is a work, the colors are fairly muted. This is a work where shape is really driving the composition. Here we have Diego Rivera, or as I like to call him, Frida Kahlo's husband. He is a famous Mexican artist, mostly known as a muralist, and this is one of the murals he did in the United States. So this is his Detroit Industry, which uses a combination of size variation and shading to suggest volume, and we increase the illusion of space in this way. So if you look at the way the figures and the machinery are represented, they're slightly stylized, they're slightly rounded, they're there's a strong connection to the basic shapes that compose each figure in each element of the machinery, and that's what creates the depth and creates the dynamism in this work. We also see that graphic designers are equally aware of the expressive power of flat and gradated shapes. So this is a cover design for Fearless Beauty, and this was created by Cecilia Sirochen. So she combines the 3D volumetric, meaning having volume, being three-dimensional, head of a model, so we see that that is a three-dimensional person's head, with this kind of headdress element with birds and these kind of fantastic swirling floral type motifs that is composed from these swirling flat shapes. So it's this idea of using a fully realized three-dimensional volumetric shape in combination with flat two-dimensional graphically designed shape to create this kind of dynamic and interesting book cover. Here's another example. We have Gustav Klimt. He's another famous artist. If you have art history, you will learn about Klimt probably. And he combines, again, this idea of the flat and the volumetric shapes to create Salome. So Salome is a biblical figure who pops up in art a lot. The symbolists really liked her. You see work portraying her in a lot of different work, from the Renaissance to the Baroque, all the way up through more modern artists like Gustav Klimt. So she's the one, her either stepfather or uncle, I forget, is a king. He is very powerful, and he wants her to dance for him, which seems a little strange to us. It's a little incestuous and weird, but anyway, so she does this dance, and he says she can have anything she wants because he's so pleased with the dance, and she asks for the severed head of John the Baptist, who's another character from the Bible. So anyway, so this is a portrayal of Salome, and you can see she's holding the head of John the Baptist below there. So that's what's going on in this image. Basically, what's interesting about it for our purposes is the way Klimt uses shape, and also the way he uses the shape of the canvas itself, right? So he has this, it's kind of an atypical shape for a canvas, right? He has this tall vertical shape of the painting, which is similar to the size and shape of a standing viewer, right? It's sort of tall, looks almost human-like in scale. And the flat patterns of color that surround the volumetric figures create this kind of weird, it kind of creates a weird abstraction and an unsettling kind of ungrounding atmosphere. So her skin, we see it looks more three-dimensional, but then we have this very flat patterning on her garment and on the background, which makes the garment and the background kind of flatten together because they have a similar use of shape, okay? So basically we see the flat patterns and color that surround the volumetric figures, while the two curving lines add sort of the sinuous energy. These curving lines kind of bring our eye up back toward the top of the image. And that sort of becomes a way to focus the eye and draw the eye up through the image. So it's another interesting use of shape. Okay. A shape that is distinguished from the background is called a positive shape. I talked about this in the first lecture on point a little bit. So we have a positive shape or a figure. The surrounding area around the positive shape is called the negative shape or the negative space or the ground. So we have the figure and the ground, or we have the negative and positive space, okay? So when an artist uses a shaped format, like we see here, we become more aware of the artwork's physicality. So this piece is 9 feet tall. It's a teacup or a coffee cup. I think it's a teacup. And it's by this artist, Elizabeth Murray. She's quite known for using shaped canvas like this. She's still alive. She's still making work. So in this, we have this monumental kind of size, monumental scale, and the painted shapes connect directly to the shaped edge. So they aren't a positive shape or figure on a negative shaped background. The wall becomes the background, and the whole thing becomes the positive shape or the figure, right? It also makes us more aware, so this is two canvases that are shaped this way that she's put together, and it makes us more aware of this negative space, this negative shape in between, and creates this kind of visual tension, okay? It also makes us more aware of the edges of the piece, and the shape of the work becomes a very physical relationship rather than just an implied shape within a square or rectangular canvas. Okay. When the figure and the ground are equally well designed, every square inch of the composition becomes kind of charged. It all becomes active. It all becomes part of one kind of composition together. This is a work by David McNutt, and he uses a single white shape on a black background, on a black ground, to create the head of a master and the head of a servant within the outline of Africa. So when you look at this, I tend to think of it as three separate shapes. That's not really what's happening though. The only thing that's being created here is the white part. So the white part is being imposed, and that is if we just look at it as what's being drawn, that is technically the positive shape or the figure in a technical sense, okay? But because of the way the lines are, it really becomes a figure ground reversal, where the figure, the white part, becomes the background to this black outline of the face within the shape of Africa. So it's very cleverly done. So basically, this was used to advertise a play, a South African play, and it communicates this kind of dramatic human relationship. We can get a sense that this is something very dramatic and charged in a very specific cultural context, right? And figure ground reversal occurs when first the positive and then the negative shapes command our attention. So they kind of hold equal weight and shift back and forth. Another example would be if you've ever seen that illustration that looks like it's either two faces looking at each other or a vase, right? And it sort of switches back and forth in your eyes. Okay. MC Escher, he's quite well-known, popular artist. Lots of dorm room posters with MC Escher. So these are different pieces, details of pieces from his series called Metamorphosis. And it shows basically his mastery of the figure ground reversal. So in this series, in each one of these examples, we see that what starts as the background transitions into the forward figure, or two forward figures transition into each other, and then the other becomes the background. So this is one of the things he's kind of known for, is these kind of figure ground reversal type illusions. Okay, so this idea of balance, which is really what we're doing, is having two equal forms that shift balance, that shift back and forth in an equal balance, what's prominent, what's positive, what's negative. So continuing in that line of thought about balance, we also see this when we take shape and combine it with color, which again, we're going to talk about color a lot. But if we look at this example by St. Francis, he's another very famous painter that you'll probably study if you take modern art. So he achieves balance in this work in a way that seems counterintuitive, right? So he has this very, very small white square, and it's inside a much larger red rectangle. But because of the crisp boundary and the central location of the square in the composition, he's able to strengthen the square enough that we find balance. It doesn't get swallowed up by the rest of the composition. It kind of becomes the star of the composition. So this is taking the idea of figure ground reversal and using it in a very experimental, abstract kind of way. Another aspect of shape is we have rectilinear and curvilinear shapes. So rectilinear shapes are composed from straight lines, angular corners. Curvilinear shapes are dominated by curves and curls and flowing edges. This example, this is Aubrey Beardsley. Aubrey Beardsley, by the way, right now has a huge show at the Tate in London. He has kind of come back in vogue recently. So this is combining this rectangular and rectilinear sort of format with very curvilinear shapes to create another interpretation of the Salome story. So this is Salome and John the Baptist again, but here we have these curvilinear type shapes in this patterning up at the top. Excuse me. We also have this curvilinear line leading up to the head. We have this very strong kind of black and white motif, and we have this combination of curvilinear and rectilinear line. Here's a very different composition composed of combined rectilinear and curvilinear shapes. The tension between them kind of activates the piece. This is another very famous 20th century artist. This is Robert Rauschenberg. This one is called Brace. He's a pop artist, and he's quite famous for using silkscreen and also for his works called combines, where he would take sort of assemblage painting and silkscreen and put things together. Anyway, in this piece, we see that we have kind of rectilinear shapes, but they're a little bit softened. And then we also have this very round sort of abstracted idea of baseball in the top corner there that sort of becomes the emphasis of the piece. So we have this combination of these straight black lines and the round sort of ball up at the top, and then we have the screen printed soft kind of lines, more organic lines in the middle, and then these sort of rectilinear forms. Okay. Excuse me, I don't know why I have like a tickle in my throat. Another classification of shapes that we talk about are geometric shapes versus organic shapes. So geometric shapes are crisp, they're precise, they're mathematically consistent. You could draw them with a ruler or a compass. So like a curve, you can have curved geometric shapes, but they're like drawn with a compass, like very precise, mathematically consistent. Organic shapes are more commonly found in the natural world of plants and animals, or the sea and the sky. Here's one of my favorite artists, Helen Frankenthaler. She's also from the Abstract Expressionism movement. She invented soak stain painting, which is a technique where you pour liquid paint directly onto raw, unprimed canvas. Anyway, so Frankenthaler, she uses organic shapes to create kind of an unpredictable sort of energy in her rectilinear composition. So we have kind of this rectangular shape that's central and it's within a rectangular format of the canvas, but we have these very organic, flowy, kind of unpredictable shapes that energize the piece because they're sort of unexpected, and we have this sort of tension between the organic and the geometric. Another thing I want to talk to you about is something that relates to shape that isn't exactly an element of art, but I think it's a related thing that I like to address, probably because I teach drawing and we talk about planes when we talk about facets of the figure and the face. So basically the same way that a line can be thought of as a series of adjacent dots, right? A bunch of dots in a row make a line, or a dot in motion makes a line. A plane can be thought of as a series of adjacent lines. So if you continue a line over and over again, you get a plane. Basically, it's just adding another dimension. So planes, which can also be called surfaces, they can also be called facets, are abstract objects. We kind of talk about them just as part of a shape or form, and use that word shape or form more than we hear the word plane, but I think it's important to understand the connection between them. So planes or surfaces kind of act like dots do. The difference is the size of the surface has grown large enough to become an important characteristic as the contour defining the plane, the outside edge of the plane, basically becomes secondary. So the size is relative to the surrounding space and the elements. But if you look at these diagrams, you can see that you can have a solid plane, you can have a textured plane, but another thing I want you to think about is when you rotate a plane, you can build mass. Any of you who are oil painters or are going to be oil painters, glazing is a technique that we use in oil paint where you put down layers of transparent glazes of oil paint to create depth. That is a technique that is very closely related to the concept of planes and how planes relate to shape. So I just like to throw this in here with some diagrams that kind of explain that a little bit. Okay, that's it for our week 1 lectures. Next, we'll talk about either value or texture. I forget what order they go in, but we're talking about value and texture next. Okay.